Shalom, shalom, my friends. Hey, Ed, it's good to see your face again. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Rob. Hi, David. Hi, Dahlia. Shalom, shalom. Oopsie. I will give me one. There we go. Let's see. Shalom, shalom. Welcome, welcome. I am refilling my drink and we're going to get started. All right. Shalom, my friends. Wonderful to see you all. L'chaim, l'chaim. Someone's been writing on the bridge downtown. I drove through downtown and I saw some Jewish scribbling on the bridge. It said Happy Hanukkah in big letters. It was great. It was great. I'm so excited. Cheer is in the air. We're also today at the Swantown Marina Boat Launch parking lot. Got together with the technicians who are going to be setting up the big celebration and streaming the Lieutenant Governor, God willing, on the big screen so everybody can see it. So I'm really looking forward to filling the streets and the airwaves with light and joy ahead of Hanukkah. With that being said, tonight we are going to conclude the fourth lesson, the fourth and final class of our discussion on anti-Semitism, outsmarting anti-Semitism, and I hope it will be on a light note for all of us. Just to recap, what in a couple sentences, what we've done so far. Class number one, we mentioned how in the Torah it says more times than any other phrase, al tira, do not be afraid. First thing we need to know about a Jewish approach to anti-Semitism is don't be afraid. Put our trust in Hashem. We're going to do whatever we need to do. That's just making a kind of a tangible vessel for God to do the rest. We can't be afraid. We need to condition ourselves against anti-Semitism. Week number two, we spoke about the fact that a lot of times people who are bullied tend to internalize the bulliness, and they feel like there must be a reason why they, so to speak, deserve being bullied. So as Jewish people, we need to be so careful not to do that, not to think that, God forbid, it's like as if we're going to change something, then the anti-Semitism will go away. Either if we blend in, then the anti-Semitism is going to go away, or if we do this, we do that. Ultimately, it's about the haters. It's about those people, like we said in Hebrew, the word is rishut. It's not a fancy word. It's just plain evil. And we are getting better. We're definitely getting better. But until Mashiach comes, it's not going to be totally eradicated. So the best thing we can do is be proud. Let the haters know that they have a force to reckon with that's not going away. And that does a favor not only for us, but all other minorities. Last week, we took a little bit of a diversion. We spoke about Israel, which is the reason we spoke about it was to talk about a modern mutation of anti-Semitism. We spoke about the fact that it's like a virus that mutates, and in our day and age, it's kind of hidden behind these organizations that attack Israel. And an unfortunate part of it is that sometimes we obviously mentioned that there is legitimate criticism of Israel, absolutely, but we stress that those that seek to delegitimize, and what was the other word? There was the third word, the three words of the three Ds.
Double standard.
Double standard. There you go. Thank you, Akiva. Natan Sharansky's 3Ds. So we spoke about those 3Ds, that if organizations that do that and have Jewish people which are passionate about their cause, reminds us that what's more important than any kind of intellectual Israel education is the emotional connection. Chances are most Jewish people screaming from the river to the sea haven't had matzo ball soup or a challah or kiddush in a long time. They haven't been at a really warm Hanukkah party in a long time. Bringing them to appreciate their own heritage will help them have a fonder place about the land of Israel, the richness. There's a value beyond the Zionist movement because Israel is a much far deeper and far older connection than that. That was a little bit of a distraction. It was a little bit of an off topic. Now this week we're getting right back onto topic, and we are going to talk about what do we do in the end of the day. Yes, it's all good and fine. We know about our own perspective. We know about not internalizing the bulliness. What do we do when we come into contact with anti-Semitism? What do you do actually? What is a Jewish view about when you actually encounter an anti-Semitic? And we're talking about cases where there's a question. Where there's obviously certain people that they're clear out. They're trying to hate us. They're trying to wipe us out. There's the Hamans. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about we have an anti-Semitic situation. Let's take a look at an interesting situation that's not so long ago, and let's take it apart a little bit. So, in the 70s, there was the Prime Minister of France, right? I think his name was Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle in the 60s. So in those times, Israel had commissioned France to buy from them 50 Mirage jets, right? Fighter jets. And then ultimately, before they got them, Charles de Gaulle decides that they're going to, so to speak, have an embargo on both nations, both Israel and any of the Arab nations. And this is, so to speak, equal. Of course, it's not so equal because the Arab nations had plenty of other sources where they could get their great and mighty weapons from, but Israel did not. Israel did not really have many other sources. Things got even worse when, in 1970, the next prime minister's name was Pompidou. Give me a thumbs up if you remember him. Pompidou? Yes, Pompidou. David, do you remember the controversy around the story?
There was an embargo on both sides, but he released it for the Libyans.
The Libyans, exactly. It was a big joke because Libya had a government that was a few months old, and they didn't have an even space to take in these fighter jets. He's like, oh, Libya is not involved. It's not involved, right? So he was basically said, I'm going to sell. He has a conviction that he's going to be selling it to Libya. Meanwhile, the feeling on the Israeli side was that was just a front to get possibly even these same jets to the Arab nations that sought Israel's annihilation. Let's take a look at this. I'm sorry, I forgot to say that it was a terrible time because the time of the war of attrition, which a lot of people don't know about, the war of attrition was basically a fight between airplanes in the Sinai where there was a lot of loss of life. Israel was feeling really threatened for its safety and its well-being, and all of a sudden Pompidou is selling it only to Libya but not to Israel. And let's take a look at this from the New York Times, page 116, text number 1. After much hesitation, French officials acknowledged tonight that about 50 Mirage jet fighter planes would be sold to Libya. The confirmation of the sale was expected to provoke sharp protests from Israel. The Israelis suspect that the planes will sooner or later find their way to the fighting fronts. The French Defense Ministry reaffirmed the French embargo policy of selling no arms to the countries directly in conflict, Israel, the United Arab Republic, which was another fancy term for Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, and said they were convinced that Libya sought to supply her own forces. Israel fears of the Libyan mirages, fears of the Libyan mirages based on a conviction shared by some French experts that the Libyan Air Force in its present state could not absorb such numbers of a highly advanced plane. The fear is compounded by the aggressive stance taken toward Israel by the new revolutionary military regime, which has been in power in Libya since early September. The plane sold to Libya is believed to be the Mirage 3, the same type as the 50 built for Israel, but placed under embargo in 1967. The Israelis are expected to find particularly galling, right? Charles de Gaulle, the fact that they have been denied about the same number of planes now made available to a hostile Arab country. So now imagine you're an American Jew, which I think we all are. What do you do in such a situation? Pompidou comes to United States a few weeks after this whole story breaks. What are we supposed to react? What does Judaism say? That's what we're going to take a look at. So before we get to what actually happened, we're going to take a look at a story, which I love when this happens, that you give a class on a, so to speak, unrelated topic, and then it relates to the Parsha. Last week's Torah portion talks about the story of Jacob and Esau meeting each other, Yaakov and Esau. After Jacob had been by Uncle Laban for 22 years, he had now married, he had 11 out of 12 of the tribes that were born already. The only one was Benjamin. Benjamin wasn't born yet. It's time for them to go. Why is it time for them to go? The reason why Jacob was there in the first place is because he was escaping his brother Esau. Esau wanted to kill him because he stole the blessings. You may recall this from the Parsha. And Rivka, the elderly mother of Yaakov, sent a message to Jacob that Esau has calmed down. The oven is not so hot. Come back. It's okay to come back. Jacob carefully takes this journey and he sends messengers to see how Esau is doing. He doesn't even send flesh and blood messages. It says he dispatched angels on his behalf because he was afraid that if he ticks Esau off, then he's going to, they could lose their life. So these angels come back. They come back with the reports and they tell Yaakov, Esau heard that you're coming, and he has 400 men with him. When we say 400 men, that means 400 men, they're ready for battle. So Yaakov immediately takes on a three-pronged approach for a possible struggle with Esau. What does he do? Let's take a look at text number 2, page 119. Jacob prepared himself for a three-pronged response: a prayer, a gift, and an armed struggle. So, first of all, he prayed to God, powerful prayer. He also sent gifts to appease Esau ahead of time. So he sent him cattle, male cattle, female cattle, all sorts of stuff that Esau might find valuable. And finally, he's in the possibility that Esau might become aggressive. He splits himself up into two, so this way, if one part gets hurt, the other one would not get hurt. What do we see? Yaakov did not say, "Hey, Esau is coming towards me. Let me get my strong sons, and we are going to take him to task. We're going to fight back against this menace, against this evil brother of mine." He says, "I'm going to try to be diplomatic." He prays to God, right? He makes himself a vessel. He sends gifts, and he thinks about the possibilities of what will happen if a battle comes their way. I want to point out that Jacob's family was not weak. How do I know this? Have you heard of the story of the young woman Dinah being raped by Shechem? Well, what happens then? 2 of the 12 get up and essentially wipe out a full city. Okay, it's a whole story for itself.
Yeah, but they were all weakened at the time.
Okay, that's right. From circumcision, it's true. But in essence, they found a way to get their way with force. Yaakov himself was strong. He had struggled with an angel. They did have some might. I'm not saying he was stronger than Esau, but he definitely had some might, but he chose not to go that route. He chose not to take the route of war. He chose to take a route of diplomacy. Well, did it work? Let's see what happens. Did Esau end up attacking him or not? Join me in text number 3. This is a quote from the book of Genesis, where we see that Esav ran toward Jacob and embraced him. He fell on Jacob's neck and he kissed him and they wept. So it sounds like it worked. It sounds like the elaborate gift giving, the prayer, and all the effort that Jacob put into this moment of meeting up that it shouldn't have end up in conflict worked. We are going to take a look at this saga to see if there's anything we can learn about our own battle of anti-Semitism. Now, I have to point out, if we look at the Torah, the word which tells us that Esav kissed Jacob looks different than usual. Here's a picture of a very old Torah scroll, and it's going to zoom in right over here. You can see the word that is circled. That is the word that is circled is Vayishakehu, and he kissed him. And on top of the word, there are these dots. Every single letter has a dot on it. That is only done in a couple instances in the Torah. When it says that, it is a message to tone down what that word could have meant. In other words, it says, and he kissed him, but to tone down that it wasn't such a genuine kiss. It wasn't exactly as the simple word would imply. Now, I'm sorry, I want to correct myself. I said it's an old Torah scroll. It is not an old Torah scroll. It's an old Chumash, an old Bible, but it has these dots that are included in the Torah scroll. So there's something there. There's a hint there that's not only in the commentaries, it's literally right there in the sacred Torah scroll, which is so rare that you actually see hints like this. So let's take a look at what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says about these dots. Text number 4, page 120. Let's do this. The Torah features dots over the words, and he kissed him. This is because Esau did not kiss Jacob wholeheartedly. So that's one opinion, that he did not kiss him with his full heart. He kissed him. It was ingenuine diplomacy for that moment. However, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai argues, and he says it is an established fact that Esau hates Jacob. In Hebrew, the word he uses for that is halacha. We all know if you're familiar with the word halacha, halacha means like the law is. The law is that Esau and Jacob, they don't go together. Esau hates Jacob. Nevertheless, his compassion was moved at that time, and he kissed him wholeheartedly. For that moment, Esau kissed him wholeheartedly. There was a moment of closeness over there. It didn't last. As Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, that the halacha, the law is that Esau is always going to hate Jacob. But there was a moment of connection, a moment of closeness over there. So some opinions say that it was not a genuine kiss, but it was a diplomatic move for the moment. Esau had been won over for a moment, at least on the outside. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, no, it was actually a wholehearted kiss. Bottom line is, whichever way you go, but all the more so according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it worked. It worked to avoid conflict for that moment. You know, they talk about feigning commitment. There's the governor of some big country. He comes to one of the most rural villages on the top of a mountain. He comes for it's election year. He's coming to campaign for himself, and he comes in, and the mayor is waiting for him. And he says, "Mayor, how you doing? And what can I do for you? What can I do to help your town?" And the mayor says, "Well, we have two problems that I would really love your help with. The first problem is that we don't have a doctor here. We really need a doctor here when people get sick." So the governor, before even listening to the conversation, he whips out his cell phone. He gets on the phone. "Okay, I need you to do this and this. Yep. Okay. Consider it done. Doctor will be here shortly." Then the mayor continues, says, "And the second problem that we have here is that there's no cell phone service." So sometimes in the world of diplomacy, right, people do things without a full heart. But sometimes you get through it. So when we're told about something in the Torah, it's because there's an eternal lesson to it. And we've seen in the history, in Jewish history, that people have looked towards this saga between Jacob and Esau as a playbook for fighting anti-Semitism. In other words, Yaakov did what he could to avoid conflict. not to fight the anti-Semite, to fight the evil person, not to fight Esav. He tried to be diplomatic to get through. He wasn't going to transform him. He wasn't going to make him a different person, and he didn't. But he got through it for a moment. As a last resort, Jacob had a backup if this was going to end up in a full-blown conflict. However, Jacob's approach was try to use diplomacy, even if the anti-Semite is going to stay the anti-Semite, but to use it in order to get through the situation, to let the situation blow over, and just keep going. Because we may not be able to accomplish everything, but at least we can survive the moment. And Jacob is teaching us something about a lot of the time not going towards attacking those who don't want to see us do well. So let's take a look at our history. In our history, besides for when King David and King Shlomo ruled over Israel, for most of Jewish history, we have had to deal with other governments. To a lesser degree, to a greater degree, we've had to deal with other governments. And we've dealt with it more often than not, historically, with diplomacy. What do I mean? Take a look at this. Nachmanides tells us as follows, text number 5. Coffee before I keep going. The Medrash relates that when Rabbi Yanai would set out for a meeting with the Roman government, he would read this passage in the Torah regarding Jacob and Esau. The sages had a tradition that this passage was a guide for our exile. Therefore, when Rabbi Yanai would visit the rulers of Rome for communal issues, he would consult this passage to follow the advice of the wise Jacob. It is indeed appropriate for all generations to study the person to adopt into actual practice. What are we talking about? The Romans, for a long time, had a hand in the government in Israel. They ruled directly or through a puppet king, but the Romans were very involved in Israel. And Rabbi Yanai, during his lifetime, was an ambassador, a diplomat on behalf of the Jewish people to negotiate with the Romans. The Romans didn't care for the Jews. They didn't like the Jews. They hated the Jews. But Rabbi Yanai went to work with them. As a matter of fact, the story is recorded in the book, in the Medrash. It tells us that Rabbi Yanai would always be offered after his meetings. The Roman emperor would offer him an escort to take him home, and he would always refuse. Why? Because when Jacob met Esav, Esav said, "Come, let me escort you." And Jacob said, "No, don't escort me. You keep going. My people, we're going to go so slow." And in the end, Jacob and his family, they haven't met up yet with Esav. Esav kept going, and Jacob did his thing. And maybe when Mashiach comes, we're going to meet again. But Jacob didn't take the favor. He knew it wasn't going to be good for him. So Rabbi Yanai also, as kind of taking a page out of that playbook, says, "I'm not going to take any escort from you back home." One time, he took an escort, and the escort robbed him of all his belongings. So it served to reinforce the idea of looking towards a story and seeing what we can learn from it. So, in general, we, in Jewish history, if you look at the stories, we've tried to work with our oppressors. We've tried to work with them to negotiate to get what we need. Even Yaakov, you know what he did? Him and his family, they bowed down to Esau. I mean, bowing down is not a Jewish thing. As a matter of fact, we spent a lot of this course talking about the Purim story. Mordechai didn't bow down. I mean, it almost like, 1 second, do you bow down or you don't bow down? So it's very important nuance here. When we negotiate, when we are diplomatic on behalf of the Jewish people, it can't go against our foundational values and beliefs. In other words, we can try to be nice on the outside in order to get through a situation, to be nice to those who are oppressing us in order to figure out a way to get through the situation. But Haman considered himself somewhat of a deity. He actually wore an idol around his neck, the commentary tells us. So by Mordechai bowing down to Haman, that would be a sense of idolatry. And it doesn't work, it doesn't make sense that would be the way for us to get what we need by going against the principal commandment of only having one God. But in general, when possible, we've found ways to give, to be diplomatic, and to work with our oppressors to get what we need, as opposed to fighting and taking on a war kind of method, protesting and screaming them down, because as we're going to continue to see, a lot of the times that doesn't necessarily help. Now, obviously, this is nuanced, and obviously, this is not across the board. But what we're going to try to discover today is that there is a tremendous value and benefit to the idea of being diplomatic, a lot of times quietly, and that can even do us better than a lot of the war-style conversations. Now, remember, we quoted this passage from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that said that halacha, a law is that Esav hates Jacob. It is tradition that is actually a code word for, take a look at this. I'm going to put it up here on the board. Right, an established fact that Esav hates Jacob. Well, actually, Esav is a code word in Jewish literature for Rome. Esav descendants were the Romans, and a lot of times in Jewish literature, we could use those two terms, Esav and Rome, interchangeably. So it's an established fact that Rome hates Israel. So Rabbi Shimon, when he was talking about it's an established fact that Esav hates Jacob, he wasn't just talking about Esav and Jacob, he was talking about his own lifetime. Because you know who else was a diplomat? Rabbi Shimon was a diplomat. Rabbi Shimon, in a story that we're about to learn, went and traveled to Rome to negotiate the Romans. What happened? You may be familiar with this. The Romans handed down an edict on the Jewish people during the times of the Talmud. And the edict that they had was no Shabbat, no circumcision, and no family purity, which is the laws that govern a Jewish family in a couple's intimate relationship. It is appropriate to use the mikvah on a periodical basis and to restore a special sense of closeness and intimacy in the marriage once a month through the mikvah process. Now, he outlawed these three foundational mitzvahs: Shabbat, Brit Milah, circumcision, and Taharat HaMishpacha, using the mikvah. So the first Jewish diplomat that went in was a guy named Reuven, Reb Reuven, and he's called in the Talmud. And Reb Reuven reasoned with the emperor, and he said like this: why are you're trying to stamp out the Jewish people? But if you want the Jewish people to be poorer, look what they're doing. They're not working 1 day a week. That's making them poorer. Give them Shabbat, let them work less days. Give them 3 days off. The less they work, the weaker they are, the less they have. You want them to be a weaker people? Circumcision makes a person weak. Let them be weaker. Circumcision can lead to more medical complications. Let them have circumcision if you really want to hurt them. You hate the Jews? You want them to have less children? Give them the chance to use the mikveh, because part of using the mikveh is that you abstain from intimate relations for a few days a month. So stop give less chances for pregnancy. And that convinced the emperor for a short term. But then somebody told them that it doesn't work like that. These are foundational things that are helping the Jewish people prosper. So he brought back the edict. Okay, now what do the Jews? So the Jewish leaders put their heads together and they decide, take a look at this text, number 6 from the Talmud. So the Roman government once issued a decree that Jews may not observe Shabbat, circumcision, and family purity. And is that whole story of Rabbi Reuven, which I just told you. And then finally, the Jews says to themselves, who should go to Rome to solicit annulment of the decree? Let Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai go, for he is experienced in miracles. You want to hear what happened? It doesn't say that, it didn't quote the whole story here. But essentially, Rabbi Shimon, who was a miraculous person, the writer of the Zohar, he was chosen to go to reason with the Romans. So he goes there, and on the way, he notices there's this demon that's around him. Apparently, he had a little bit of a better sense of spiritual vision. So he could sense there was a demon. He's like, what are you doing here? You traveling with me? The demon's like, yeah, I'm going to help you. Don't worry. So he gets to Rome, and a demon possesses the emperor's daughter. And the emperor's daughter says, basically, she starts acting totally nuts. You ever heard of a dibuk? So she's totally possessed by this demon, this dibuk. And she says, she's screaming, Rabbi Shimon can help me, Rabbi Shimon can help me, Rabbi Shimon. So the emperor says, oh, Rabbi Shimon is here. Shimon, can you help my daughter? Anyway, so he whispers into her ear, he whispers some sort of Kabbalistic incantation so that the demon should leave. He says, you've done your job, you can leave. And the demon leaves and she's healed. So the emperor turns to her and he says, what can I do to repay you? You can take whatever you want from here. So Rabbi Shimon says, great. Show me where you keep your decrees. And he showed him, and he found the decree of the one outlawing Shabbat, Brit Milah, and Mikvah, and Rabbi Shimon tore it up, and that was the end of that decree. So we see a history of diplomacy. In European Jewish history, there was something called shtadlanim, people that worked towards influencing the government. They were called court Jews. I know that in today's day and age, a lot of people use that in a negative term, but in the end of the day, that was how the Jewish people rolled. There was a lot of people. If you've got the book, we're not going to go through the whole chart, but if you look at page 123, figure 4.1, you can see a little biography of some of the more famous court Jews, people that negotiated with evil governments. One good example we're gonna highlight was the fellow Rabbi Yosef of Rosheim, who was the court Jew, so to speak, of Charles V. Charles was a grandson of the king and queen of Spain, the ones that kicked out of the Jews of Spain. So he didn't have a history for loving the Jews, but he still had a court Jew. Take a look at this. Text number 7. In 1531, the denouncers once again hounded the... I'm sorry, I just want to point out, this is from Rabbi Yosef of Rosheim's own book, his own writings. In 1531, the denouncers once again hounded the emperor, Charles V, while he was in Belgium and Holland, lands uninhabited by Jews. Many requested that I travel to those lands to oppose the accusers with the help of God. I was at the court of the exalted emperor for 4 months, from the 1st of Adar until the 1st of Sivan, pursuing the interests of the Jewish communities. Sounds like the legislative season. Although Rothright attempted to swallow me alive and to bring about my demise, God in his great mercy sent his messenger to save me from his hands and from all those who sought to harm me. At that time, I had an audience with the emperor in his private chamber. I spoke with him for as long as I needed, and he responded sympathetically. During this period, when I had free time and was secluded in my room, I authored a book titled The Sanctified Path, Derech HaKadosh. Now, I have to tell you, it's a very, very interesting historical piece. So we don't know a lot about the details because there's not so much recorded history from this time, but it's clear to see that he was involved in diplomatic relations with the emperor at that time, even though, like he said, he had to hide himself for a long time. He secluded himself for a long time while he was going back and forth in the emperor's court because he was fearing for his safety, and this fellow Rothright was trying to get rid of him. So it was not an easy time, but nevertheless, he succeeded to do something for behalf of the Jewish community. This book that he wrote, Derech HaKadosh, it's quoted by other Jewish people, Jewish writers from the same time. However, the book itself seems to have been destroyed at some point in Jewish history. Another good example is King Ferdinand and Isabella. Now, this is an example of how diplomacy doesn't always work, but they tried. Before the Spanish Inquisition, a great Jewish sage by the name of Abarbanel, he was a wealthy Spanish Jew, tremendously influential in the government courts. I think he was a doctor as well. He tried to get Ferdinand and Isabella to get rid of the decree and the, what do they call it? The Inquisition, right? If you go on page 126, figure 4.2, you can see a picture, a famous piece of artwork depicting the scene of Abarbanel, who's kind of facing the back of the photo with the kippah, trying to reason with the king and queen. And the way the story is written in history and in Abarbanel's own book is that he was having success until the inquisitor, what's his name? The chief inquisitor came in, and Thomas de Torquemada, right? He basically said, oh, Abarbanel wanted to give a significant amount of money to the king and queen to bribe them to look at the Jewish people more favorably. And the inquisitor came in and basically told him, you know, you're selling yourself for money. And he ends up ruining the plan. And unfortunately, in this case, the Haman of that time, Turkmen of that time, was successful in in deactivating the diplomacy. In that case, it didn't work. But it does seem in Jewish history, more often than not, diplomacy did get the Jewish people not to transform the anti-Semites, however, to get past a situation. Sometimes there are certain people like Hitler, may his name be erased, Haman, this guy, the Inquisitor. There are people you cannot reckon with. As a matter of fact, in the whole story of Purim, the whole story of Purim, the story takes place with Achashverosh. They're trying to work with Achashverosh, Queen Esther and Mordecai. They're not even going to deal with Haman because Haman is such a solidly, consistently evil person, a Meshugana, that you just can't work with him. But if there is room to work by certain people that are not that radically crazy, diplomacy is a very strong, important method in the Jewish experience. Now, this is something which I'd love to bring up, because our world tends to like to put people in boxes. This guy's anti-black. This guy anti-Semite. This guy is whatever, anti this, that. People are as if people are in boxes. The reality is that the human condition is complicated. Most of us, except for like the people that I just mentioned, certain Mishugayim, most of us don't fit into a box. Most of us struggle. And I can tell this to you from a Hasidic perspective, but here's some quote from Modern Science about the famous Mel Gibson story. Shake your head if you heard about the Mel Gibson story, right? The famous Mel Gibson, he got drunk. He was arrested, and in the police car, he asked the policeman, "Are you Jewish?" The guy said, "Yes." He starts saying all these blessings about the Jewish people. So here's a comment from a modern scientist, David Eagleman, page 128, text number 8A, talking about the kingdom, the government that every person represents. Akiva, thank you. Oh, I didn't know that. Same day as the Jewish Federation shooting in Seattle. Wow. Akiva knows, you know your stuff. This is, would you say 2007?
In 2006. And so this Mel Gibson story actually kind of overshadowed what happened here in Seattle and took up a lot of the headlines and stuff like that. So kind of interesting, terrible coincidence.
Crazy. So interesting coincidence, right? Or how that happened. So Gibson has a Jewish friend, of course, who says that, this guy's not an anti-Semite, he was drunk. And a lot of people think that, he was drunk, so it shows what his true colors are. Now, this is a very interesting piece. Text number 8A. Brains are like representative democracies. They are built of multiple overlapping experts who weigh in and compete over different choices. There is an ongoing conversation among the different factions in your brain, each competing to control a single output channel of your behavior. When the hostess at a party offers chocolate cake, you find yourself, who hasn't been in this situation? You find yourself on the horns of a dilemma. Some parts of your brain have evolved to crave the rich energy source of the sugar. Other parts care about the negative consequences, such as the health of your heart. Part of you wants the cake, and part of you tries to muster the fortitude to forgo it. The final vote of the parliament determines which party controls your action. That is whether you put your hand up or out. As the French essayist Michael de Man, I don't know how to pronounce it, put it, there is as much difference between us and ourselves as there is between us and others. In other words, we often contradict ourselves. Most of us, I'm not saying everybody, but most of us are not hardened, cruel, or square, in a certain direction. Most of us have different voices inside of us. In Hasidic thought, we call this the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara, the good inclination, the evil inclination. And this is something which I really want to focus on in order to talk about when there's an opportunity to be diplomatic. Remember that the person that has maybe said something terrible, something awful, something despicable about Jewish people may not be as evil of a person as you think. They have voices inside of them. Maybe they have bad friends influencing them. And an influence from somebody like you, good influence, might do some good. So take a look at Mel Gibson. 129. Returning to Mel Gibson and his drunken tirade, we can ask whether there's such a thing as true colors. We have seen the behavior as the outcome of the battle among internal systems. To be clear, I'm not defending Gibson's despicable behavior, but I'm saying that a team of rivals' brain can naturally harbor both racist and non-racist feelings. Alcohol is not a truth serum. Instead, it tends to tip the battle towards the short-term, unreflective faction, which has no more or less claim than any other faction to be the true one. So this perhaps can shed light on why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai could say that even though it's a law that Esav hates Jacob, that Rome hates the Jews, nevertheless, there was a time when Esav kissed Jacob. There's a time when diplomacy works. There are moments when we can get through, even though it seems to be the overarching condition that we are hated by a certain group or a certain person. Now let's go back to Pompidou. Let's talk about Pompidou. What happened over there? So you may recall when Pompidou came to the United States, he was met with incredible protesting. He was met with incredible protesting in Chicago, where he was. it made such a big deal. I'll put it this way, for most of history, we've lived in conditions where we couldn't protest. We couldn't say anything else. That's it. You could only be diplomatic. But what about now in the U.S., right? They tell a story. They tell a story about this Russian refusenik who tried to apply for a visa to go to Israel. So 3 a.m., he gets a knock on the door from the KGB. And they say, "You Jew, here in Russia, you have no food to eat?" He says, "No, I can't complain." He says, "Here in Russia, you have clothes to wear?" I can't complain. You have a job? Yeah, I can't complain. So why do you want to move to Israel? So I can complain, right? So in the US, we have the ability to have free speech. Is it still appropriate to engage in diplomacy, or should we let the haters know when they're being haters? What do? Take a look what happens in time of Pompidou. Page 131, text number 9. President Nixon made a hurried trip to New York yesterday to apologize to President Pompidou, who was angered by what he termed insults to himself and his wife during pro-Israeli demonstrations touched off by his state visit to the United States. The French president had been angered by a jostling that members of his party received from demonstrators in Chicago, whose actions were marked by boos and angry cries, and by what he viewed as an acceptance of such hostile acts by the Chicago police. So President Nixon had to do damage control when Pompidou and his delegation were in the U.S. because the protesting was that strong. Well, here's the question. Was that a good thing or was it not a good thing? So I want to share with you talks from the Rabbi from that time, where the Rabbi zeroed in on a very revolutionary view, which went contrary to a lot of the mainstream Jewish organizations. Take a look at this. What is the cost of these protests? Text number 10a. The public protest against the president of France angered French officials. This blocked any lobbying efforts that French Jews might have been able to make to prevent or at least reduce French assistance to Arab countries that are hostile to Israel. The stated reason for these protests was to demonstrate that America is a democratic country and that American Jews are not cowardly. This is a worthwhile objective when Jewish lives are not at risk. However, when Jews are threatened with the sale of many military jets to Libya, we have two options. We can organize public protests, or we can make every effort to either prevent or postpone the sale, reduce the numbers of jets sold, or to at least prevail upon the French to send less effective planes. Such aims can only be achieved through quiet diplomacy. The proof is that agreements of this nature have been reached in the past. What the Rabbi is trying to say is that Pompidou did whatever he did, probably because he wanted to curry favor with the Arab nations. When we're dealing with lives, making statements and protests may have very damaging effects. And we have to look at what is right now, what can we do that might possibly save lives is through quiet diplomatic channels. See, how can we postpone the sale? Or how can we counter it with some unter den Tisch, we say in Yiddish, under the table sales to back up the Jewish people? As a matter of fact, take a look at what the Rebbe said later. Once this was declassified, the Rebbe says like this. Text 10b, page 134. For a talk of the Rebbe in 1971. When Mr. Pompidou visited the United States, there were mass protests against him intended to intimidate France. This effort backfired. It can now be said that despite the French embargo against selling arms to the belligerents in the Middle East, the French president had allowed the sale of small arms and light weapons to Israel, items that can be sold without attracting publicity. In other words, he was putting on a front. What his motivation was, it's unfortunate. At the end of the day, behind the scenes, Mr. Pompidou was actually helping Israel in smaller ways. However, as a result of demonstrations, the approval of sales was withdrawn. This is the fact. The fact is that when he saw those demonstrations, it only made things worse for the Israelis. After some time, when he was no longer being disparaged, he resumed dealing with Jewish people behind closed doors and reinstituted the small arms sale. He also arranged for 300 Jews to be able to leave Egypt. That's a big deal. That's 300 lives saved. All of this was accomplished without demonstrations and without publicity. The Jewish media was warned against disclosing any of this, and we only know this from the non-Jewish press. The conclusion we must draw from this case is that we do not influence anti-Semites by constantly yelling at them, you are an anti-Semite, you are a thief, you are a murderer. Rather, engage them in diplomatic conversation. Although such individuals are well aware of what we think about them, they are nevertheless human beings and wish to behave like human beings. In other words, a lot of the anti-Semitic government officials, they know what we think about them. Shouting at them may not have the best results. I'm not saying every situation is a cookie, is the same exact thing, but there's something to give us pause here about protest. If we are looking for the best interests of Jewish people, most of the time, being like Jacob, quiet diplomacy, being like Rabbi Shimon, diplomacy, doing things behind closed doors may have better effects. You know what's another example of this? Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms, you may have heard about this, but he was a conservative that for whatever reason had a straight record of voting against giving aid to Israel. Anybody remember Jesse Helms? Jesse Helms? Yeah, Jesse Helms. And the Jewish establishment would often talk about him as an anti-Semite, as somebody that was trying to hurt Jewish people in the Jewish cause. And he came from a southern state. And he seemed to be very consistent with this way of voting. So comes 1984, and an effort is made amongst Congress to create what's called Education Day on the Rebbe's birthday. And it was to honor an initiative that the Rebbe was very passionate about creating better education in the realm of morals and values for all Americans, and a matter of fact, people across the world. And the Rebbe had done so much in that realm to inspire a greater level of education that they inaugurated and they celebrated his birthday as Education Day. And in Congress, they signed this proclamation. There was different years, there were different things, but in 1984, they had this big luncheon. And one of the participating, was it Congress or Senate? Senator. He was a senator. Jesse Helms was a senator. So Jesse Helms was part of the senators that wanted to honor the Rebbe. So he's sitting there at this gathering together with everybody. Alan Dershowitz heard about this gathering, and he writes a letter to the Rebbe, really upset that Chabad, at a Chabad event, so to speak, they could be including somebody that was so hurtful to Israel like Jesse Helms. And he wrote a very hurt letter to the Rebbe, asking the Rebbe to make it clear what the Rebbe stance is about Jesse Helms. In the view at that time, Jesse Helms was a racist. He was somebody that stood consistently, had a track record for whatever reason against Israel. Now, first of all, to make something clear, the Rebbe explained something that this is not something that, it's not an official Chabad event. This is not something where Chabad is honoring Jesse Helms. This is an event done by senators. Jesse Helms wants to come and honor the Rebbe. That's Jesse Helms' prerogative. He decided he wants to honor something good coming from a Jew. That was his decision. He didn't have to. So he decided to be part of this. First of all, join me in text number 11. This is a quote from a long, long letter in English from the Rebbe to Alan Dershowitz. So first of all, the Rebbe says, I trust you will agree that in regard to persons of influence, whether in Washington or elsewhere, the first objective should be to persuade and encourage such a person to use all his influence in a positive way in behalf of any and all good causes which are important to us. We should welcome every public appearance which lends public support to the cause, especially when there is a likelihood that it may be the forerunner of similar pronouncements in the future. Meaning, don't discount a good thing just because he's done a lot of other bad things. If he's willing to support us in one good thing, let's take him and use it out. And hopefully there'll be more pronouncements like that in the future. Then the Rebbe kind of tries to teach Alan Dershowitz the reality when it comes to American politicians. My experience with such people, though I have never personally met the said person, the Rebbe's referring to Jesse Helms, has convinced me that politicians are generally motivated more by expediency than by conviction. In other words, their public pronouncements on various issues do not stem from categorical principles or religious imperatives. Hence, most of them, if not all, are subject to change in their positions depending on time, place, and other factors. Therefore, the Rebbe continues, I believe, therefore, that the proper approach to such persons by Jewish leaders should not be rigid. As a rule, it does no good to engage in a cold war, which may often turn into a hot war, nor does it serve any useful purpose to brand one as an enemy or an anti-Semite, however tempting it is to do so, even if the permit vehemently denies it, right? Sometimes our kishk is burning. We want to shout and use every social media channel we have to shout out and denounce the person. But the Rebbe says it can only be counterproductive. On the contrary, ways and means should be found to persuade such a person to take a favorable stance, at least publicly, right? Like Esav, at least publicly, he kissed Jacob. Did he transform Esav? Esav was still a murderer. He went to kill many people, and he left a terrible mark in the world afterwards. But for the moment, Jacob got through the situation. We haven't too many friends, and attaching labels that will not gain us any. Instances abound where the approach advocated above produced good results. There is surely no need to point out to you that responsible Jewish leaders consistently cultivated good public relations, indeed even cordial relations with President Carter and his predecessors going back to President Roosevelt, regardless of their sometimes openly negative feelings towards Jews and Jewish causes. In American presidency and in American politics, we've had leaders that have not been friendly to Jewish people and Jewish causes. Yet, most Jewish leaders have taken the energy to cultivate a good relationship with these folks because most people are willing to change or to go against what they've said in this world that we live in today if the time, the setting, the context is right. You never know when your chances. And therefore, the Rebbe was suggesting that, first of all, we weren't honoring Jesse Helms. He decided on his own to be a part of it. Second of all, to distance him can only be counterproductive. You never know. The fact that he felt a certain sense of closeness this time may help in the future. Now, if any of you remember what was the future of Jesse Helms, he had a big transformation. And this is in Professor Dershowitz's, he added a postscript of his own. I'm quoting from, I have over here, Professor Dershowitz's own words in an interview afterwards. Sure enough, very shortly thereafter, Senator Helms assumed a very influential role in the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee and became one of the strongest supporters of Israel and of other Jewish causes as well. So obviously, this is Alan Dershowitz's words. The Rebbe had an enormous influence on persuading Jesse Helms that even with his very conservative values, he could become a beacon for the Jewish people and the Jewish state. So we don't know exactly why Jesse Helms changed his tone, changed his tune. But what we can learn is that there is tremendous importance to being optimistic, to being diplomatic, even with those that don't seem in today's politics or in today's climate to do things in the best interest of Jews and Jewish people. Quiet diplomacy can get very far. But what about beyond that? What about beyond that? What can we do in our world to deal with anti-Semitism? So Judaism also advocates that when it's possible to take somewhat of a holistic approach, that too can change the tune in our world. And I want to share a video about a very special initiative that's been done to affect all people that I think could make a big difference in this regards. Let's take a look at this. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go.
Negative thoughts, actions, and speech create negative energy. Conversely, positive thoughts, actions, and speech create positive energy. And that's what led, with an idea that has its genesis in South Africa, to the idea of ARK, acts of random kindness. You see, this is kind of shaped a little bit, more or less, if you use your imagination, like Noah's Ark. And the idea is, you take some change, you place it in here, and when it's filled up, we pass it along to someone who's less fortunate. It isn't just the money collected, it's the thought and the feeling that it represents.
So I went to a public school. I studied math and physics, and we studied how to solve math problems. I didn't know how to solve my own problems.
Rabbi David Aaron, a Jerusalem-based educator, reflects on his personal experience.
The real problems of life is what education should be focusing on. It's essentially about building people, and only great people will do great things.
It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Mr. President.
On March 30th, 1981, then President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, delivered a luncheon address at the Washington Hilton.
Thank you very much.
He left the hotel at 2:27 p.m., but as he headed to his limousine, a would-be assassin opened fire. Reagan was critically wounded, and the nation collectively gasped in horror. The president survived, and at a public gathering 2 weeks later, the Lubavitcher Rebbe insisted that the instructive lesson of the assassination attempt must similarly survive. The Rebbe saw the event as a wake-up call for the nation to upgrade its approach to education.
Sedor der Chok HaMedina medav gehen in a Beis Sefer. In der Beis Sefer meyusod und durchgenommen. A was darf geben a Beis Sefer darf geben Yidis. Nicht darf ausformen, aufton, aufmachen. Dem Jeser Leib Hodom, als soll sein mit Midis Tevis. Und soll wissen, als stark, als geht und lernt in dem Besser Sefer. Aber der Riker lernen seiner ist, was zum Ton Teva sich. Und das ist der Teva Amiti für sich. Und das ist in ganzen Nitereien, in der Tochnis und in der Programm von Besefer.
As much as we want to graduate mathematicians and scientists, we also want to graduate decent human beings.
Dr. Rona Novick, Dean of the Azrieli Graduate School of Jewish Education and Administration, has given ample thought to this problem.
Very few educators would invite a charismatic speaker or have a big assembly program to create readers. They would understand that the way that we build reading skills is piece by piece and building block by building block. We start in kindergarten and first grade and we keep building on it. Well, we need to look at character education and social emotional learning in exactly the same way.
Judaism teaches us that it's important to give charity every day. And the more you give charity, that muscle of kindness within you gets stronger and stronger.
Rabbi Levi Greenberg and his wife Shana are emissaries of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in El Paso, Texas.
We embarked on a campaign to bring this message of daily giving to every single child in El Paso. And so we brought to El Paso the ARC campaign. All the children in the school received one of these boxes, and they were told that the purpose of this box is to be taken home and filled every day. If they have extra coins, they should ask their parents for some money. After a month of collecting money, their class would nominate charities that should receive their combined money. And the winning charity would receive the combined monies that they had collected throughout that month. The ARC project, giving money every day, takes acts of random kindness and turns them into acts of routine kindness.
Raising a generation of individuals empowered with a sense of purpose and trained to pursue acts of kindness is an important factor in curing and preventing numerous social ills, including the reduction of hate and bigotry, along with anti-Semitism.
The more we give, the more we respect. We respect human life, we respect property, the more dignity we have for ourselves and for society. If we want to stop anti-Semitism, we have to stop hatred. And we have the opportunity to nip hatred in the bud by increasing in acts of goodness and kindness and inspiring and encouraging all of humanity to do so. Every single person should give charity every day, and hatred will be a thing of the past.
The call of the hour, more necessary than ever, is for each of us to adopt a charity box for regular, daily contributions, and to encourage all around us, family and friend, Jew and non-Jew, to act similarly. actively demonstrate, encourage, and promote kindness, sympathy, and altruistic care. If a little illumination eliminates a lot of darkness, think of what a rapidly swelling force of systematic goodness can achieve for our communities, and ultimately for humanity. It's time to turn up the light.
What do you say
Is
about
it not true that children in the Chabad houses are taught ever since they could walk to put coins in the tzedakah box? And the tzedakah box is on the, pardon?
You know who taught us that?
Well, Rabbi Naparsik had a little box and, on the wall where the children, before they sat to eat, they put coins in the tzedakah box. That's how I learned about the tzedakah box.
Exactly. The Rebbe taught us. The Rebbe taught us about giving charity at every opportunity to be a giver. Now, look at those kids for the public school in El Paso. By the way, I happen to know this Rabbi Greenberg personally, close friend of mine, and it's been a sweeping movement in El Paso and in the cities around there where more and more public schools have gotten involved in these, giving out these ARC charity boxes, act of random kindness. These kids, they all vote they vote in their class about which charity. It could be a pet shelter, it could be a homeless shelter, it could be something to better the community, it could be whatever it is. There's no rules, right? But they're busy with the act of giving from such a young age, such a tender age, to care for others that are less fortunate than they are. And this is a Jewish value that we, in this blessed country, in this Western culture that we're in right now, where we have the ability to engage with others by something which sounds so simple and unphilosophical, like an act of tzedakah, an act of charity, can go a long way from a child's young age. Just like they learn how to write letters and read, and all the building blocks of information that we give them, building blocks of character, can go a tremendous long way to stopping hate, which we've seen rear its head in recent years so tragically. But let's keep in mind that in the system that most kids are educated in, there's very little value and very little education given about unconditional caring for every other one.
With Rabbi Lavatinsky, if a child brought in a tzedakah box and it was full, they were given a new box to take home with them. So they always had a brand new tzedakah box.
Beautiful, beautiful. Look at that. The message that the giving never stops. It never stops. And, so it doesn't make a difference. So the coins are going to add up to a couple of dollars. The act of giving means that your mind is busy with giving all the time. Every human should give tzedakah every day. Jewish people, we shouldn't do it on Shabbat. We give extra before Shabbat, before we light candles. But if we give charity every day, that means that not a day goes by without us forcing ourselves, even just for a moment, no matter how busy things are, to think about others. That's one thing. One more thing I want to share before we conclude today's class is that Haman, when he says to Achashverosh, he's trying to play on Achashverosh's emotions, and he says, the Jews, they're spread out amongst your whole kingdom. They're all over. Look at this. Text number 12, page 140. Haman told King Ahasuerus, there is one nation that is scattered and dispersed among the nations throughout all the countries of your empire. I mean, what's wrong with that? Who cares? Why is that something to get mad at? Take a look at page 141, text number 12b. Haman claimed there is one nation that is scattered and dispersed. He was referring to the fact that the Jews were internally divided. He argued that they would be unable to defend themselves because the discordant people cannot develop a cohesive strategy, nor would they pay heed to their leaders. Subsequently, when the Jews repented, there was unity among them, and they gathered in their cities with mutual love. We therefore send packages of food to one another on Purim to demonstrate that this mutual love is a cause of our deliverance. When we bicker, when we fight, when one Jew shames the other Jew, that unfortunately gives space for anti-Semitism, for non-Jewish people to wedge something and split up Jews like this. And once you start that, it doesn't end well. when we stand together, even with our differing values, which I guarantee on our Zoom here and beyond the Zoom in our shul, in our community, we have a lot of different values and a lot of different views. If we can't listen to each other talk, if we hate each other for who the other person voted for, if we talk down about them, it makes us more susceptible. Jewish unity makes us stronger, helps us work together and stand as a united front. And that's what Purim is about, a time when we celebrate by sharing gifts of food to other people, because it's a reminder that we need to care about others. So in terms of affecting anti-Semitism in our own communities, two things we can do is by taking a tzedakah box, taking a charity box. If you need one, let me know, I've got plenty. And giving it to a non-Jewish neighbor or a Jewish neighbor, anybody. Giving somebody a charity box and encouraging them to do charity, to give a coin in the pushka every single day. A coin in the tzedakah box, let them give it to whoever. They don't have to give it to Chabad. If they want to give it to Chabad, that's great also. But they could give it to any 501c3 or not 501c3, anybody that's in need. Let them give every single day. That is something, a practical takeaway we can take from our 4-part discussion. Find one person this Hanukkah season that their gift that you're going to give them, it will be a tzedakah box, a gift that keeps giving. And second of all, to find one Jewish person you can't stand and try to see how you can be a little more respectful to them. And with that, my friends, I'm going to conclude my part of these 4 lessons. And I want to share tremendous gratitude to you for taking part, taking interest, and being willing to learn and deal with a very painful and uncomfortable and unpleasant subject. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and look forward to celebrating with you under better circumstances very, very soon. Any protests?
Did you at any time read all the way to the end of this book?
I had to in order to give the class.
Mm-hmm.
And you know,
it says quite a bit about the Jewish people against each other and togetherness.
There is so much juicy stuff in this book. A rabbi's dream would be to just have you guys lock them to a Zoom with your cameras on, and I can just talk and talk and talk. But alas, I don't have the option to do that. So I always have, I have the job of trying to cull and take out the parts that are the parts that I feel can give the most powerful lesson. I try, but there's so much that's in that book that I encourage anybody who has the book to really read it and enjoy it, and then take
to the very end, read it. There's
yeah.
so many things past the key points.
Yeah, all the appendixes.
And why am the only woman that took this class?
You're a strong woman. You're not the only woman here, first of all. Second of all, there have been other women, other classes. I know that some of the folks who joined us the last few weeks are traveling for Thanksgiving. So unfortunately, we couldn't make it work. That will be good for everybody, but there'll be many further opportunities, God willing, to encourage people to give tzedakah, to encourage Jewish unity, and we'll share this recording as well.
I watched so many children in Rabbi Naparsik's kitchen putting in little coins in the tzedakah box.
Yep. So that's exactly it. By the way, the Rebbe taught us that in our kitchens before we cook, we should have a charity box there, and before we cook for ourselves or eat ourselves, to put a coin in the charity box. It's something that it just helps you be a little more selfless. Thank you for the warm words, Rob.
And when does this start?
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
If I don't stop learning, I'm gonna have a problem.
You're amazing. You're amazing, Akiva. Dahlia and Akiva, thank you for sharing. This link is a link in the chat to a book by, I guess, somebody from around here.
Yeah, so this book here, thank you, Rabbi Yosef, amazing class. I'm sorry I wasn't here last week, but this content has just been really applicable to my own life personally, but then also professionally. Diplomacy, it's tricky, and there's so much to think about here that's percolating in my mind right now. But this book here I shared is by Dr. René Levy, and he was born in France. He lives here now. He's been teaching at the University of Washington for more than 40 years. He's also on the Jewish Community Relations Council. He's on the Israeli Affairs Committee. And he wrote this book, and it's specifically for the Jewish community, and it's called Baseless Hatred, so referring to Sinat Chinam. And the political divide, the cultural divide within the community around various issues, and how to bridge that divide and come to a common place. So it really relates to a lot of the themes from this course, and I highly recommend it. I own it, I read it, and want to share it with you all. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have 2 copies of it. I minute to place it. I have 2 copies of it, and it's a great book. Thank you.
I want one.
Okay, Dahlia, you want it?
Yeah.
Okay. Good to see you all. Have a good night and a happy Hanukkah. See you Sunday at the parade.
Hopefully.